This time last year, I looked back at how many legendary creatures have been printed in 2022. Including all digital, but not including backgrounds and planeswalkers that can be played as commander, there was 391. If we include backgrounds and planeswalkers as commander, we get to a 425. 425 legendary creatures in 2022, which was alarmingly around 25% of all the legendaries ever printed in Magic. Now, some of you were expecting that number to have ballooned further this year, but in reality, it looks like it's shrank. It looks like it shrank. In reality, it's kind of stayed the same. 415 legendary creatures were first printed this year. And with Commodore Groff being the only planeswalker that I seem to be able to find that can be played as your commander this year, that makes it 416 potential commanders. This means there was slightly more legendary creatures, but slightly less things showing up in command zones. The funny thing is, this year's legendary creature count only counts for 19% of all possibly ever printed commanders in Magic. The reason for that being is that there were so many printed last year. That is 25% the year before, 90% this year, because that 25% isn't part of this year, and next year's will look smaller again as we get, hopefully, the same number. I say hopefully because I think there is a diminishing return on the amount of stuff you bombard the game with in terms of new cards, new commanders, and new ways to play. That said, the conclusion that I'm going to come to in this video as we talk about this probably means that actually they could push that number a bit further and it just wouldn't matter too much. Let's talk about that. If you like the stuff that I make and you enjoy these videos, use the link in the description below to coolstuffinc.com. Use the link to get 5% off your order and to help support the show. I'm actually really shocked that there's so few legendaries this year, and by that I mean it wasn't a ballooned number compared to last year, primarily because it felt like we got a lot more legendary creatures in the secret lairs, like the Dungeons & Dragons ones for example, and Doctor Who felt like a much more legendary heavy set than the other Universes Beyond Commander decks from the year before, which was Warhammer. I did look into this briefly. For the Warhammer 40k Commander decks, excluding the 4 secret lairs that included some reskins, we get 24 legendary creatures. Meanwhile, Doctor Who brought 76 legendary creatures. So it was a more legendary heavy Universes Beyond set. That was one of the ones that I thought really ballooned out the number last time. Turns out adding only 24 legendary creatures is far less than what I thought the Warhammer decks actually added. That's the thing, there's a lot of new cards we had of other Universes Beyond products that I've actually come to quite enjoy. Hell, fuck it, I love them. I love the Warhammer decks. The Doctor Who decks made me a Doctor Who fan. So what that really means with the more legendaries in like the Universes Beyond set, and I think via the secret lairs, I haven't done an actual number check on that. I think what that means is that the gulf is being made up by a few more legendaries per Magic set. But ultimately, when I looked back on this year's worth of product and looked at the most recent sets, none of this really frustrated me or upset me. The fact that the number had stabilized at the same amount was actually a pleasant surprise. One thing I spoke about in the last video last year was that I just don't know half of the commanders that came out in the last year. Kazla the Broken Halo, for example, I recognize the art and the mana cost and the fact that it's a 5/4. That's about it. I forgot this thing even had Convoke. And as a content creator for Magic and a big enthusiast for the game, I actually bought all of these precons, just 1 copy of each. I also wanted the Planechase cards. But ultimately, I never got to play with all these commanders. Oh, I don't know, I didn't get to play with 25% of them because I just didn't have the time. And my job is to play and talk and make videos about Magic. So the average consumer probably got less time than I did. But once you come to terms with that, then I guess it's not really that much of an issue. That's a weird thing to say, but it's the truth, right? I've talked about this over the course of the last couple of years, but Magic as a hobby or as a pastime or as a game that you engage with has transformed just due to the sheer volume of content that it puts out, the sheer number of cards, formats, and ways to play. You simply cannot be in the know about everything anymore. It used to be one of those lifetime hobbies where an enthusiast knew about pretty much everything, and now people like myself or the prof or other content creators simply just don't know about half the stuff that comes out. The idea of knowing like every common from every set, like I probably did when I was super into the game back in 2010, 2011, is absolutely impossible now, because there's thousands of the fucking thing. And in some ways that's freeing because there's no weight of trying to be this super fan who knows everything. It's just a game that's so big and so expansive you can't possibly know everything. I genuinely believe half the development teams and developers, even people like Gavin Verhey, might struggle to know some of the most recent stuff, and their job is to design this because they don't have their fingers on it or in every pie or every card. Don't quote me on that. Gavin's probably going to show me up now by knowing every legendary that came out last year, he can probably name all, what was the number? Can Gavin Verhey name all 415 legendaries that came out last year? It doesn't really matter if he can, but that'd be impressive if he could. I put this out on Instagram saying, did you know 19% of all the commanders ever printed were printed last year? And people were like, of course, but we're aiming for 50% next year. Because people are really... I guess when the hobby changes in any capacity, or a game or pastime changes in any capacity, there's always friction and tension, frustration and upset. I know I've felt that way about many a thing. And I do think I try to be really rational and reasonable about the changes that happen. And I think the increase in number of legendaries, it seems really absurd at the forefront of the problem. It genuinely does. That many is probably a little bit too many, but ultimately, the way the game has gone, it's a small drop in the ocean of some of the issues that Magic has faced over the last couple of years. I think power creep is probably much worse than, what's the word I'm looking for here? Card bloat, like sheer number of cards. And that brings me to my next point. Not all of this stuff is from or a symptom of the direct appeal to Commander. I'm framing this as talking about legendaries and cards that can show up in your command zone, but in reality a lot of these things can show up in your command zone and give a lot of people options to play weird, eccentric and silly decks, like the card I just showed on screen, Anim Pakal, 1000th Moon. Whenever you attack with one or more non-gnome creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on her and create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens which are tapped on attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Anim Pakal. She creates gnomes as you attack with non-gnomes. It's hardly breaking the bank of power, is it? I'm not saying she's a bad commander, but what I do think is this is more of a standard or limited plant than it is a commander plant. Breach's Eagle Pillager is a kindred payoff for your pirates, and I've enjoyed playing it in a little bit of standard. I kind of gave up because I can't bother to play it shouldered, but also historic brawl as well. I like this card, and I don't think it's there solely to sell to commander players. If anything, these are like tentpole super duper rares to open up to power up a certain archetype in limited. Or Capricotti Sunborn, a 4-mana 4/4 when you attack, tap 2 untapped artifacts or creatures you control. If you do, discover 3. This isn't breaking commander or even aimed at commander. These are tentpole, in this case it's an uncommon, the others were rares I believe, even though the set symbol sucks and I can't really read it very well, but this is a tentpole uncommon designed to lure you into playing a certain archetype in limited. I think Lost Caverns of Ixalan illustrates where they're going, with the sense that there's a lot of legendaries. It's like kind of like I don't know if it's a byproduct of aiming at commander or tentpole uncommons being pushed in power level and therefore being uncommon, because it then becomes a downside that you can't play multiple in your deck. Or you can play multiple in your deck, but playing 3 or 4 copies of an uncommon that's legendary will mean you'll have some rotting in your hand at some point in limited, right? These are two things that happen by pushing legendaries in those slots that are like, they're not individual, they're not mutually exclusive, they're kind of two parts of the same wider design puzzle. In short, I think some of the later sets are wonderfully well designed and fun to play in limited, and I think a lot of the, whether it be uncommon or rare legendaries, aren't breaking the bank of power level that we've seen with Fire Design and Horizons and everything from like War and Throne onwards right up until like Modern Horizons 2 and a little bit after. Everything was so pushed. I think it's really easy, like the thumbnail for this video probably does, to grab a number that sounds crazy, but I want to talk about and expand it in a video like this where I'm like, that number sounds crazy, but it's not so bad. If anything, the fact that it hasn't ballooned out to 800 cards this year, and the fact that we haven't had broken legendary after broken legendary after pushed staple after pushed staple is a good thing. If anything, the design of Magic right now feels like it's in a much better place than it was 12 or 24 months ago. Recently, a patron of mine did a little anger about how Fire Design had ruined the game, or was continuing to ruin the game. And it made me realise that actually, I think Fire Design as a concept, this design philosophy that started with War of the Spark onwards, making everything quite complicated and powerful. And although I like complicated and powerful Magic, it ended up pushing the power level of many cards to be way too fucking good. I feel like that era might be over. I don't know if it's officially over. This is something that Wizards can probably comment on, but I feel like we've moved on from that. But it's easy to regurgitate the same sound bites and to be angry at everything, and to take a number like 19% of all legendaries and be like, holy fuck, how dare you? I tweeted it earlier today. Not with any added weight. I sometimes do this ahead of videos when I'm writing things or putting notes together or getting ready for a video. Sometimes to gauge like how many people interact with it. Gives me a good vibe check for whether people give a shit about the topic. It's also just interesting to see how people react. And ultimately, again, with the Instagram post and the Twitter post, there were just people being really quite negative very quickly. And I get it. That's kind of like the culture of everything, right? That's in some ways, I know I feed into it. I think my videos are reasonably rational on the whole, but I also don't hold my tongue when I'm pissed off. And I think people really feed off to having their pissed off feelings validated. It's a weird relationship to the whole thing, the whole medium, the whole game, the whole community, because like my relationship as a critic, I want to be open and honest, and sometimes that's quite openly critical, but I also get fed up when people bang the same drum and get pissed off at stuff that I don't really understand why they're angry at it. Layoffs, I'll be frustrated about that. Some of the product pricing that's happening right now, I'll be frustrated about that. Print quality, to an extent, I'll be frustrated about that too. Can I even think the changes to the secret layer distribution? That'll be a video in a couple of days. I think that's not a positive pro-consumer move, but I think the design of the average Magic card is at a good spot. Everything's very, very wordy. I think Magic's getting wordier. Whether it's slowed down, whether they've reached a certain point similar to the number of legendaries and stopped, I don't know yet. That's something I've been talking to some people in the Discord about, number crunching number of words per Magic card so we can look at it. That might be a future video. Comment down below if you'd be interested in seeing that. I think ultimately I've just come to terms with the fact that I'm not detached entirely, but I've just given up looking at everything. Sometimes I just glaze over and I'm like, fine. I wish that wasn't the case for the game that I love and is my life. But sometimes it's got to be that way. Sometimes it is what it is, right? So in essence, the number of legendaries this year is bordering on the exact same as last year. The number looks a bit better on the surface. It's basically actually the same. The number's a little bit lying in that sense. And ultimately, I'm kind of happy about that. I really thought we were on a trajectory towards just thousands of legendaries a year and just crazy amounts of just like cards you've never seen before. I mean, we kind of already are there. Perhaps I'm now accustomed to it, acclimatized to it, and that's why it doesn't bother me so much. Or maybe I'm just taking a small celebration that things haven't got any worse. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I thought the numbers were interesting at the very least, and I thought this conversation in my head around, am I to blame for everyone being so fucking angry at dumb shit sometimes? I guess sometimes I am, and I try not to be that person. I try to be rational, but maybe the thumbs and the titles that lure you all in are just too spicy. I bet there's people who've never watched my fucking videos, see a title or a thumb and just think they know what I'm gonna say. I think that's also a funny thing about being a creator. Fuck it, this video became more about being a creator than it did about the number of legendaries. How self-absorbed of me. Look at me, ma. I'm a social media influencer. Smash that like button, don't forget to comment, subscribe, and all that shit, and I'll see you in the next one. Ta-ta for now.